What's up, everybody? Welcome on into the Slate. It's a Tuesday edition. Adam Kaufman, pleased to be here with you with the usual suspects, Gary and Thorne, Matt LaMarca. We're going to be basically all football over the course of the next, what do we have? Not even 40 minutes, guys, to get through everything before the Madden Sims take over again at 6 Eastern. Maybe a little NBA at the end of the show. We'll see if we're feeling frisky. But before we even talk about the games, we're down to the Final Four. Obviously, it's championship weekend, not Super Bowl, but conference championship weekend in the NFL. So you've got the Niners, the Eagles, the Chiefs, the Bengals. We'll talk about all of them and the respective matchups that'll happen on Sunday. First, though, just some news and notes around the NFL that I want to start with. And I want to begin with Aaron Rodgers because he appeared on the Pat McAfee show earlier today and was asked about his future and basically gave a very typical Aaron Rodgers non-answer of he's got to decide what he wants to do for his personal future, never mind where he wants to play or anything like that. He has to decide what is next for Aaron. Well, by the way, he is due about $60 million this coming year and said he would be open to restructuring that in order to make things easier for a team. Not necessarily the Packers, but maybe to facilitate a trade. I guess where I want to start here, LaMarca, is just when I thought like no quarterback, let alone a Packers quarterback, no quarterback ever could be more half in, half out every single year than Brett Favre at the end of his career. Here comes Aaron Rodgers along, and it's a real hold my drink kind of moment.
Yeah, I mean, I don't blame him for having questions about whether or not he wants to be in Green Bay anymore. The only thing is, like, didn't he just re-sign with them? Like,
yeah, he's got 3 years left in the deal.
He would have to force a trade, and I don't know. I wouldn't necessarily be lining up to trade for Aaron Rodgers at this point, even if I was a team that needed a quarterback. And by the way, the team that I support does very much need a quarterback. But at this point, like, do you really want to take on a 39-year-old player who's showing signs of decline and is making like $50 million a year? Do you really want to trade for that when he's so, wishy-washy? And I don't know. I can't imagine. It's the same thing for me with Tom Brady. I don't know why the rumors of him to San Francisco are heating up, or, were heating up at one point. Like, at some point, we're going to have to start considering life without these dudes.
To me, Karen, it's I guess to push back only to this respect of what LaMarca was talking about. If Rodgers, I'm not sure it would look any different if he came back to Green Bay next year. And as LaMarca said, he's coming off arguably the worst year of his career. Didn't have a single 300-yard passing game. He had more interceptions with a dozen than he's had in a decade. He, was at somewhere below 4,000 passing yards for the season in a year that he played at least 15 games. Remarkably bad stats if you're Aaron Rodgers, especially when you're coming off of 2 most valuable player awards. But don't you kind of feel like if he did go somewhere else, he'd suddenly reinvest himself and we would see a much better year out of Rodgers?
It's really hard to get in the mind of Aaron Rodgers. Let's just say that.
Impossible.
I think in a general sense, what you're talking about, a sort of like, new scenery, new vibes, reinvesting, that would make sense. I just don't know if we can attribute anything normal to Aaron Rodgers. I mean, even the way his career has gone, I mean, we're talking about obviously him coming off one of the worst seasons of his career, but you'll remember about 5-6 years ago, there was already sort of a like, oh, Rodgers might be done. Like, he had a bad season. He was getting a little injured, and we were wondering whether or not he would still be able to produce. And then suddenly he has back-to-back MVP caliber seasons. I mean, I think Rodgers to me reminds me a lot of Justin Verlander, sort of in a cross-sport comparison where the arc of their careers have just been so interesting. And they've been able to maintain this level of elite production for so much longer than your average athlete. So again, it's hard to really attribute any normal quote unquote thing to Aaron Rodgers. I mean, I think the really interesting part of this story today, I think it was Adam Schefter. It might've been Ian Rappaport. I'm not sure who actually broke this news. But the Packers, in considering a trade for Rodgers, basically came out and said the quiet part loud today, that they would not be dealing him to another NFC team. He would only be available for trade to an AFC team, which, I mean, you're already kind of hamstringing your trade value or an asset's trade value when you're eliminating half of the league as possible trade candidates. And I also think, to the grander point that we're making when we talk about, Tom Brady and we talk about Lamar Jackson, it's just like there's a lot of quarterback movement on the horizon or possible quarterback movement on the horizon. And to Matt's point, I mean, I'm probably, if I've got like a giant haul of draft picks that I'm looking to give up for a quarterback and my options are Lamar Jackson or Aaron Rodgers, I have to feel like more teams would be like, I'd rather take Lamar Jackson versus the 39-year-old quarterback who may or may not want to even play football anymore. So it's going to be a really weird offseason to see just how these teams value this position, especially coming off just like the abysmal trades that were the Deshaun Watson trade and the Russell Wilson trade. So I'm just curious to see how quarterback trades are even valued in 2023. And I think Rodgers, in terms of the pecking order of quarterbacks looking to find a new home, probably isn't even at the top of the list.
I wasn't planning on going here, Lamarca, but since you brought it up, I do find it interesting. The Tom Brady Niners thing, and this is really, it's less about Brady and more about the Niners because they're still alive. They're playing this weekend and have a very realistic shot, obviously, of beating the Eagles. They're only 2.5-point dogs in Philadelphia on Sunday with the NFC Championship game. It's just such a fascinating dynamic for me at quarterback because you have Jimmy Garoppolo, who obviously is as good as gone. That wouldn't surprise anybody. But you have Trey Lance, who you invested, if you're the Niners, so much capital in to move up and take him in the first place. Only a couple of years ago, missed basically all of last year with the injury. Brock Purdy emerges and may very well lead this team to not only a Super Bowl, but a Super Bowl victory, while Tom Brady is off in the shadows looking for a new team and the whole storybook, go play in the Bay Area at home to end his career, all of that. So you have this, I don't know, if you want to take out Garoppolo, three-headed monster sort of situation. How does, before we even get into the game itself, we'll do that later, but how does the outcome, the overall outcome of San Francisco this year impact what direction they go in at quarterback, you think?
I mean, it should tell them that they don't need to pay a big-time quarterback to win football games. I mean, their roster is so loaded. They're basically, they're paying Garoppolo starter QB money, and they've gotten, similar production from a guy who was the last pick in the draft. So if I was them, I would not be looking to overpay for any quarterback, be it Tom Brady, Jimmy Garoppolo, etc. I do think Lance gets another chance as the team's starter. I mean, what have we seen from him so far in the NFL? Like 6 games? It's way too early to write that guy off after, like you said, they traded so much draft capital for him. So I'm fully anticipating Trey Lance to be the guy next year. And it's certainly nice to know that Brock Purdy has proven he can be an insurance policy.
So even, Gary, and if the Niners win a championship, which again, very realistic possibility, you think Trey Lance is provided he's healthy enough to be it, is the opening day quarterback for that team?
I mean, at this point, it might just be coach speak, and it might just be, the deception that NFL head coaches love to put out there so much, just tricking everybody with all their deception. We've heard Shanahan already talk about how there's a chance Garoppolo could be ready for the Super Bowl if they were to make it that far. So who knows? Maybe even Jimmy G starts the Super Bowl, but
that would be nuts.
Look, under this very specific
only because if Brock Purdy gets you there, and it's not like he just like Drew Bledsoe, Tom Brady, like just fills in for one game in the middle of the playoffs after,
Look,
the other
I
guy
know what
had
you're
the
saying.
rest of
I
the
agree
time.
with you. I'm just saying, like, there's so many variables this season still that it's hard to talk about next season. But look, I do think it's going to be very difficult if Brock Purdy is the starting quarterback of a team that wins the Super Bowl. It's going to be very hard for him to not. It'll be his job to lose, most likely. I think Trey Lance will have to come in and maybe win this job back. I don't know. I think the main thing here, to Lamarca's point, is this is the only situation in football where you can almost treat quarterback like running back if you're the 49ers. And in a weird way, they almost treat running back like quarterback. At least with the haul they gave up for Christian McCaffrey. But it's the system. It's always been the system. It's the Shanahan system. And it's plug and play. And you need to be able to pay the guys around to execute the system more so than the quarterback. So I think the Niners even knew that to some extent by drafting Trey Lance. I mean, they gave up a lot of draft capital to do that, but they wanted a quarterback on a rookie contract so they could keep paying all these skill position players and all these defenders and all these offensive linemen. Like, they know how this works. They're aware that the system is what's valuable here, and not necessarily the quarterback. So, yeah, I don't see them bringing in Tom Brady. I just don't think that's something that's going to happen. I think it'll be the very cost-effective Brock Purdy, Trey Lance combo in whatever order that happens to be.
I think most people would agree with this. To me, for Tom Brady, and we got all off season to talk about this. Brady was on his own podcast, by the way, and said when I'll effing tell you when I effing know to Jim Gray, something like that. But Lamarca, don't count out your Jets if he doesn't go to the Raiders like most people believe is the favorite.
Tom Brady should go to the Boca Raton Country Club.
Yeah,
seriously.
Well,
what does this guy have to prove at this point? Just go home, Tom. Like, you just got your butt whooped all year. I just don't understand why this guy is still doing this. But I guess that's what makes him and me.
Fair. The Tom Brady's old team, maybe you've heard of them, the New England Patriots. There actually is a reasonable talking point with the Pats today, despite their not being involved in the postseason. And that is the hiring of Bill O'Brien. As the expression goes, when there's smoke, there's fire. Well, the Bill O'Brien smoke started months ago, and turned into a wildfire of expectation that he would be back in New England. Did not even meet or interview with anybody else. There were obviously other teams with offensive coordinator vacancies, and even the rumblings that he could be in line for the head coaching job in Arizona just because of his ties to the new GM there. Instead, back in New England, the new OC, they will officially have an OC, which they did not last year with Matt Patricia and Joe Judge calling those plays. And Mac Jones apparently is real excited to work with a guy that he has some familiarity with back at Alabama. Will this make a difference? Because as we know, guys, the Patriots numbers offensively, Garion, were just so bad last year, but not just bad, a remarkable step back from Josh McDaniels to, again, Matt Patricia. So does Bill O'Brien take them back to any level of optimism where they were, heading a year ago?
I don't think so. I also don't think that really anyone was overly optimistic outside of the New England market about the Patriots the year they got absolutely shellacked by the Bills in the playoffs. I mean, there's just a class of teams in the AFC right now. Like, the quarterback situations in the AFC, and maybe this changes if Lamar Jackson is traded to an NFC team this offseason, but you've got Josh Allen and the Bills, you've got Joe Burrow and the Bengals, you've got Justin Herbert and the Chargers, and obviously you have Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs. And anything after that, I just don't really see how you compete, how you cobble together an offensive system that compares to just these superhumans playing quarterback in this conference. Look, having an offensive coordinator, probably a step up. I think it's tough if you're someone like Mac Jones, you're now entering your third season as a professional, and you're going to be dealing with your third different offensive coordinator. That being said, Bill O'Brien is yet another Bill Belichick guy. I'm sure the verbiage is going to be pretty similar. I'm sure there's going to be commonalities in this offense, but yeah, I don't know. I just don't. I know there's some money coming off the books for the Patriots this year. It'll be interesting to see what they do in free agency, although that's not necessarily been Bill Belichick's greatest strength as a general manager or as the talent organizer of the New England Patriots. But yeah, I don't know. Like, maybe they go 10-7. I don't think they're in the class of those other teams with their elite quarterbacks. I don't think this really changes all that much for me.
Yeah, in other words, Lamarca Garion is saying that Bill O'Brien can help your offense, but he can't suddenly make Mac Jones Joe Burrow.
Yeah, ain't that the truth? I think that the whole offensive coordinator Matt Patricia situation, Mac Jones should write those guys thank you cards for, kind of taking some of the heat off of him. I think Mac Jones was put into an elite situation as a rookie, playing with, one of the best defenses in the league, and he was able to win games. This year, that defense wasn't quite as good, and he struggled. So I think that the Patriots are very much unsettled on the offensive side of the ball, right? Like, if you asked me today, is Mac Jones a guy who's going to be an NFL starter for the next decade? I would not be able to confidently answer that question. Yes. So while certainly having a, more experienced play caller in the building should help, it's really on Mac Jones to prove that he is that caliber of player.
All right, let's talk about the players that are still alive, not in a literal sense, but in a football sense. And these two games that we've got coming up on Sunday. It's a shame that we're not going to have football on a Saturday, but that's just the way it works when you get down to the Final Four. First game, I already mentioned it earlier. It's in the NFC, guys, and we'll take a look at the DraftKings Sportsbook, some of the numbers that are available to you. If you want to get in, place some bets. You're still a few days out, obviously. The Niners at the Eagles. 2.5-point favorites, Philadelphia at home. It's a lowish, middle grade point total, if you will, at 46. To me, obviously, I want your thoughts, and Gary, and you start. To me, an upset here is not only would not be surprising, I'm inclined to go with it. San Francisco winning this game, but how are you feeling?
Yeah, I would say right now I'm probably leaning towards the points. It's an interesting spot. I think the Eagles were really able to exploit a major flaw of the Giants defense last week, which was they came into that game ranked 32nd in DVOA against the run. And the Eagles have one of the most diverse and exotic rushing attacks in the NFL. And the Giants just could not stop them. And they were able to run amok pretty much the entirety of that Saturday night. That's not going to be the case with San Francisco, who has one of the best run defenses in the NFL. And conversely, the Eagles defense, while it did get better towards the second half of the season, they brought in some really big interior veterans on that defensive line. Ndamukong Suh, I think Linval Joseph was the other one who they signed midseason. But so their rushing defense got better. But when we talk about like funnel defenses in the NFL, it just means a defense that's elite at one thing and not so elite in the other thing. The Eagles are a funnel defense. They are number one against the pass by DVOA. They're 21st against the run. If they can't stop San Francisco on the ground, I don't want to say it could get out of hand like the divisional game against the Giants got out of hand, because I think the Eagles are just too good to be curb stomped. But you've got to be able to stop the run against San Francisco. We saw Brock Purdy. He didn't look terrible against Dallas, but that was clearly the worst game he's played in some time. He looked a little unsettled. He just wasn't able to make the big plays that he'd been making prior, or at least at the same, with the same level of consistency. And that could maybe happen again against an Eagles defense that can definitely also get pressure on the quarterback. But I really do think the key matchup here is San Francisco's rushing attack versus an Eagles defense that has had a little issue stopping the run so far this season. So I'll just keep taking the Shanahan system and take the points here.
LaMarcus, see this any differently?
Yeah, that Eagles rushing defense has really plagued them to their 15-1 record with Jalen Hurts at quarterback. I just look at this and I see two teams that have a ton of talent on both sides of the ball. I see one team that has a rookie quarterback, and I see one team that has the guy who was the MVP of the league through the first 15 weeks. So I will lay the 3 points, the 2.5 points with the Eagles. I think that no rookie quarterback has ever made it to the Super Bowl, let alone won the Super Bowl. I'm not saying that Brock Purdy can't be the first, but it would be weird if he was the first. So I think that the Eagles they're just the better team overall from top to bottom. I mean, the 49ers has as much talent as anyone. We know that that's the fact. It's been the case all season. It's why they've won so many games in a row, but they have not faced a team as complete as the Eagles.
But couldn't you say the Eagles haven't faced a team nearly as good as San Francisco either? Like their schedule was very cream puff. It was one of the biggest storylines of the season.
For sure. But the Eagles just stomped the Giants 38-7. The 49ers escaped against the Cowboys in a game where Dak Prescott basically peed his pants on the field. It's different to me.
I just can't think. What was the Eagles' best win of this season?
I'd have to look at the schedule. I mean, I don't remember off the top of my head. They've played a cupcake schedule. There's no denying that fact, but they haven't just been like winning games. They have mauled a lot of people.
Yeah.
So I think that I'm willing to trust the Eagles in this spot. I think that personally, anything better than 3 is a play for me.
Okay, so one Kelsey plays in that game. The other Kelsey plays in the other game. It's Kelsey Day on Sunday. Bengals at the Chiefs. And this game is notably Cincinnati favored by 1.5. I think there are a range of factors that go into that. One, obviously, the rematch of last year's AFC Championship game that Cincinnati won. The fact that Patrick Mahomes is obviously not at full health. We don't even know with certainty that he's going to play, even though the expectation is that he is. And Joe Burrow's never lost to Patrick Mahomes in his very young NFL career. So, LaMarca, let's start with you this time. Is this going to be Cincy returning to the Super Bowl?
So this, it's just a really interesting number on this game, right? Like, I've been kind of looking at it since it came out. Initially, Kansas City was a small favorite. Then they moved to small underdogs. Then the Bengals got up as high as -2.5 earlier today. And now they're back down to 1.5. So this is a number that has really been kind of all over the place. And it's fascinating to me because when these two teams met in Cincinnati during the regular season, the Chiefs were listed as 2.5-point road favorites. I think that if you have a healthy Patrick Mahomes in this game, this line is probably somewhere in the same vicinity that it was last week, right? I would say Chiefs -6, something like that. So now it just becomes how many points do you want to dock this team for not even having a backup quarterback? It's how hurt is their starting quarterback. So for me, the fact that this line has been dinged, again, in my opinion, more than a full touchdown feels too harsh. I think that Kansas City stands out as the preferred side here for me. The public is going to be all over the Bengals. I have no problem with that. The Bengals have been a wagon at covering the spread since the start of last year. But Patrick Mahomes is pretty darn good himself in this scenario. When favored by three or less, or as an underdog, he's 17-6-1 throughout his career. So I'm willing to take on a little bit of uncertainty with Mahomes' ankle. I know there's the narrative that Joe Burrow is his daddy, but we'll see what happens come Sunday. I do think that Cincinnati continues to run really, really purely. Their banged up offensive line issues didn't really bother them last week, but they were playing a team that really struggles to rush the passer without Von Miller, and they were playing on a wet track, right? This week they're going to be against the Kansas City team that is third in adjusted sack rate. So I think that those offensive lines, this could be the spot where it comes back to bite them.
Gary and I like the Bengals. I do. What's your
It's because you're a square. You like every square pick on the book, Goff.
Hey, listen, and I'm just talking about straight up. I'm not talking about spreads and whatnot. But 3 out of 4 in divisional round weekend, and I what can I tell you? I like the 2 road teams that we've got this weekend. But Gary, and how are you looking at this one?
I mean, honestly, it's impossible to really assess this game until we know the health of Patrick Mahomes. And I don't mean to sidestep the answer here, but legitimately, I don't know how we look at this game and make any sort of proclamations about anything.
Well, let's presume that he is deemed healthy enough to play, and
it is fascinating, right?
Because whatever percentage he is when he's out there. I mean,
if he's ruled healthy, as soon as he's ruled in, when we get the first injury report from Kansas City tomorrow, this line will move based on that injury report. It's just, I don't know. I really don't know. I don't know how injured he's going to be. I mean, a high ankle sprain.
It's like an 8-week injury.
Yeah, exactly. In my experience with that injury, it is not something you recover from in a week. If he plays, the Patrick Mahomes that I often think of in the playoffs, especially, is, the guy who just frustrates you to no end because you think you've got everyone covered. You think he's in the pocket and you think you've got him contained. And then suddenly he scoots out of the pocket, picks up 16 yards and shuffles out of bounds. I don't think he's going to be able to do that. I don't think he's going to be that version of Patrick Mahomes. If
I
he's
agree with you,
playing
but don't you
high,
have a little more confidence just in the fact that he returned to that game last weekend? Like I
no,
would
because that's
get
all
if
adrenaline.
he
Like
didn't come
this
back.
happens a lot. We see this with football players specifically all the time. Sometimes in basketball too, where guys will return from a mid-game injury and then sit out the next 5 games because the adrenaline wasn't kicking in or something swole up after the game. Like it's really not that simple. So I think at this point, I would probably lean towards the Bengals, but I'll say this. If you want to bet the Bengals, especially with how much this line has already moved this week, I mean, Matt talked about it. Less than 24 hours ago on the DraftKings Sportsbook, the Chiefs were favored by a point. So Wednesday, when initial injury reports come out for teams, and Patrick Mahomes is probably going to be listed as limited in practice, but he'll, speak to the media, or Andy Reid will speak to the media, and they'll say, we're expecting Patrick Mahomes to play in this game because obviously it's the AFC Championship game. He's already said he expects to play in this game. But I think once that happens, this line will move again. And I think if you like the Bengals, maybe wait until tomorrow to bet them because maybe you can get them probably not again at +1, just with how much money is probably coming to the Bengals already, but maybe at like a pick'em or something like that. But yeah, look, Joe Burrow at this point, I was someone who picked the Bills last week. There was some reverse line movement that I was finding a little bit troubling, but picking against Joe Burrow in the playoffs is kind of stinky at this point. Doesn't make you feel good on game day. And obviously he's no longer the underdog, but as of yesterday, Burrow 9-0 in his career as the underdog, 5-0 ATS as the underdog in the playoffs. Like just some ridiculous numbers in games that he wasn't necessarily favored to win. That offense really moving along. I think to Matt's point though, that Buffalo pass rush has not been the same since the injuries they occurred, and Kansas City much better in that capacity. I think if we just sort of like side sweep the Bengals offensive line issues under the rug because they had one good game against Buffalo, you're probably doing a disservice. So yeah, I'd wait to bet this probably till Wednesday. I lean Cincinnati, but I'll be honest, I'm not betting any of my money on this game currently. I just think there's way too many unknowns here.
Let's start the process, guys, of getting into a little bit of the DFS, fully recognizing, obviously, that one, you're not making your lineups for the weekend right now and just leaving them in all likelihood because, like you said, the Patrick Mahomes news can impact that entire Chiefs offense and whether or not you would want to roster those guys. Although Travis Kelce, I feel like, is a fairly, safe play with whether it's Mahomes, Henny, or Lamarca out there. But looking at yeah, I believe that. Looking at some of the projections right now, an optimal lineup, and I can't read it down, obviously, but it features only guys from the 2 road teams. It is viewing no one as, super value or great opportunity on the part of the Chiefs or obviously the Eagles. In terms of ownership, won't really surprise anyone. Christian McCaffrey is projected right now to be in about 60% of lineups, whereas Jamar Chase, Gabe Davis, Dalton Schultz, Deebo Samuel, and Josh Allen, also Joe Mixon, all north of 40%. So you're going to have that top-heavy ownership when you're only talking about 4 teams that are playing, obviously. But, Lamarca, do you have favorites this weekend as we sit a few days out?
Yeah, I mean, I think Christian McCaffrey for sure deserves to be the top running back here on this slate. He's just really good, man. And I'm not overly concerned about the usage. I think that, if they're going to let Elijah Mitchell be the finisher, that's fine. All I care about is him getting his touches in the first 3.5 quarters. And he's capable of beating you in just so many ways, right? Like he had 100 rushing yards 2 weeks ago versus the Seahawks. He had 6 catches last week versus the Cowboys. He's one of the best touchdown threats in the league. So, like, he can just do it all in so many ways. And as Garion highlighted, even though I kind of made fun of him about it, like the Eagles have struggled against the run all year. So it is a spot where I think McCaffrey just is kind of a tough fade at 8K.
Garion, what about you?
Yeah, I think running back's going to be really interesting. And I almost think in a way, maybe if you want to try to get some differentiation, like you were talking about, Koff, I mean, it's hard.
By the way, why didn't you guys call me an idiot when you heard me rattling off guys that played from last weekend looking at wrong ownership numbers? You're allowed to do that. Call me dumb.
I mean, you also said getting to players that are still alive in the playoffs. I don't mean
That's
that
what
literally, which
that's-
meant you said
that's what-
everyone who's playing in the playoffs this weekend is dead.
Yeah, but that's just semantics.
Sure. Okay.
I don't listen when you speak. That's my answer.
That's fair. Just stare blankly. Anyway, Gary, go ahead.
Yeah, but I think like you got to get creative. And I would even say, you know, sort of to the point LaMarca was making, the just top end value of McCaffrey's role in this offense for San Francisco is undeniable. You know, he's someone who is probably a lock at this point for like 4 to 6 targets. And as we saw last week, that even could be a low estimation. I mean, he can be more involved in the passing game than that. But I think Elijah Mitchell is also going to have a role. And I think that maybe a unique build you could possibly look at is your 2 running backs coming from the same team and stacking McCaffrey and Mitchell in what should be a relatively good matchup against the Eagles and what should probably be a relatively high scoring game. Because again, there's only so many ways to make a different looking lineup than the other 500,000 people who are going to be building in the Millie this weekend. So maybe something like that, stacking the 2 running backs from the 49ers, because I don't think, obviously by stacking them both, you're hedging your touchdown expectancy a little bit, which is not necessarily the most, not the way to access the highest ceiling in a lineup necessarily, but that's why a lot of people won't do it, even though I think Mitchell is probably locked into somewhere between 12 to 15 touches this game.
The one thing I did say before that was accurate, by the way, even though the ownership numbers were obviously, very quickly debunked, the optimal lineup that exists at this moment are Chiefs and Niners and no one else.
Again, these are the optimal lineups using the projections that you're looking at. I just want to make that clear.
Absolutely.
If Kaufman knew what the optimal lineup was,
no doubt about it,
he would not be hosting this show right now. He'd be on a beach somewhere plugging these things into the computer. So don't feel like you can't play Eagles or Chiefs players just because Kauf's not telling you that they're not in the optimal lineup.
No, and honestly, you might want to just for differentiation's sake anyway. Optimal, it's as much about ownership in many ways as it is about projected points for individual players. But I'm guessing that people who are still watching this show are aware of that at this point. If you had to, and we only have a couple minutes left, but you've got 4, I don't know, I guess if Brock Purdy, you could take him out of the conversation if you want. Certainly Patrick Mahomes with the injury is more of a question mark. So if you're looking at Jalen Hurts, who, as LaMarca said, was the most valuable player front runner for much of the year, and obviously Joe Burrow, who is as calm and cool under pressure as anyone we're seeing right now. Do you have a favorite QB to play?
Hurts easily for me.
Easily. All right, Gary.
Mm-hmm.
I am a sucker for the dual threat upside. And as I mentioned, I don't really trust Mahomes' sort of dual threat upside in this spot if he's only playing on one foot. So yeah, Hurts does look pretty great. And I would actually say probably one of my favorite stacks would be Hurts with Dallas Goedert, because I do think another way that you're going to be able to differentiate your lineups this weekend, and I think it was kind of to your point, Koff, is when you look at the tight end position, even if there's some sort of hijinks afoot with the health of the Kansas City Chiefs offense, Travis Kelce is always going to carry a very high ownership. I think George Kittle has been just a fantasy dynamo ever since you got eliminated from the fantasy playoffs because you drafted George Kittle. He's been amazing ever since that point, coming off another great game against the Cowboys. I think those 2 guys are going to carry so much ownership between the 2 of them that a really talented player like Dallas Goedert, who's, averaging about 5 catches per game, is obviously going to be a big threat in the red zone for the Eagles. I think stacking Hurts and Dallas Goedert is one of my favorite ways to go.
To that point, I wouldn't be the least bit surprised if the winning lineup, but not that we have a clue what it'll look like, but the winning lineup in that, Millie Maker will feature 2 tight ends, throw one in the flex. That wouldn't surprise me at all, LaMarca.
Yeah, I'm a proponent of using multiple tight ends on short slates. I think, a large majority of the field is not going to do that. So again, with ownership being so important, using 2 tight ends is definitely viable, especially if you wanted to use 2 tight ends and one of them isn't Travis Kelce. I think that would be a very unique build, like Goddard and Hayden Hurst or Goddard and Kittle. I don't see very many people going with that tandem.
All right. Well, it is time for us to wrap up, sadly. But the good news is it's only Tuesday. So there's a whole lot more football talk coming up over the course of the rest of the week, not only on the Sweat in the mornings, but the Slate in the afternoons. I will be back, I think, with these same two guys on Thursday in about 47 hours, I guess. No,
It'll be Canadian content that night, I think.
How long have we been doing this?
All Canada. Ulrich will be with us, and Lamarca will be back on Friday.
I haven't worked Thursday since this show is in existence.
You're always here in spirit, though.
Yeah, that's true. We talk about you whether you're here or not. Because
that's very nice, actually.
Such big fans. All right, thanks to Eamon, our producer. Looks like we have a new guy, technical director, Cody. So thanks for hopping in with us there. Hope you had a fun first show. And for Lamarca and Gare Bear, I'm Koff. We'll see you again in a couple of days.